get so mad, there's no controlling me. My thoughts get so bad, I'm like, oh God, here goes. I lost all feeling from my head to my toes. You said some shit that I can't let go, so just stay tuned for the rest of the show.
Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for sparing some time. I mentioned to you that I read your post a couple of weeks ago about dyslexia, and it really resonated, and there was, especially towards the end, where you said about embracing.
Yeah.
And I think embracing whatever it is that comes up in your life as a barrier, embracing that and turning it around is a real superpower. It really is. So just to start off, I'll let you introduce yourself, and let's take it from there.
Yes, so I'm Vicki Goodlock. I've been in the AV industry for a very long time. I'm not even sure how many years, but I think it's something like 18. And I actually started my career in fashion. So I did my degree in a random subject called interdisciplinary design. So it was design, had elements of marketing, and also sort of psychology and philosophy. And when I talk about my degree and trying to explain it to people, I always say it's a bit like The Apprentice, the program. You basically worked with other designers to try and come up with different solutions to problems. So that's how I started my career. I went into fashion and there's no money in it. So I then swiftly moved into technology, where my first job was at Micro-P, which is obviously now Exertis.
Yeah. Brilliant. And you've just mentioned something. So in a past life, I've been a teacher, both of children and of adults. And some of the things that you just touched on there are classic strengths for people who have dyslexia.
Yes.
And your post a couple of weeks ago was about being dyslexic. Being creative, being able to solve problems, being able to look at things in a much more creative way is a really well known and well documented. If you look at there's lots of entrepreneurs who've actually come out and said, I'm dyslexic, and it is a disability as defined by the Equality Act.
Yeah. I think
but it's so
like
misunderstood. It's so
misunderstood, and I think it does depend how you view it yourself personally. Yes, people see it as a disability, but if you view it as a positive, then you can make it a positive for yourself. I never felt like this was something that was bad. And I think in my post, I said that I found out from an optician who literally just said at the time, I mean, I think I was 10. It wasn't like I didn't know anyone else who had been told they had dyslexia when I was at school. My teachers didn't really understand it. We're going back quite a long way. And it wasn't really anything that schools sort of did anything about. We went into school and said, oh, you know, this optician said she's got dyslexia. And it was like, oh, okay. And then nothing. There wasn't really help or support for it. So you just kind of got on with it and dealt with it, which for me worked. I think quite a determined person and just kind of got on with it. I think others maybe potentially would have struggled a bit more. So it is, again, how you view it. I think there's a lot more support now and a lot more understanding about it. But again, it's not where it should be, because it's still, I think, perceived as oh dear, poor you.
And I think the other thing, and the other possible reason why people don't understand it, is no two people have the same. There will be things that are similar. There'll be certain strategies that will work for you and maybe work for a whole load of other people with dyslexia, but then that same strategy won't work for a lot of others. And it's and symptoms,
and it's dependent on your own level of intelligence. So it will affect you depending on how intelligent you are as a human being anyway. So the lower your IQ, the harder it's going to be, like with many things.
How have you, in terms of, you said you just got on with it, what kind of strategies did you come up with for yourself?
I think I'm a really determined person, and I always wanted to kind of compete with others. So at primary school, it was more tricky. Obviously, not being the quickest at reading. There were things like, you know, telling the time that I struggled slightly more with. Although I did find a way of just looking at a digital clock when no one was looking. That tends to help.
Wow.
But I think by the time I got to secondary school, I just aligned myself with the clever kid, right? I made best friends with the head girl. She was brilliant. She ended up going to Oxford, and she helped me. She basically pulled me up with her, I think, and I just tried and tried and tried until I got it.
That's
and
amazing.
In the end, I mean, I walked away with two Bs in GCSE English because I was determined I was going to not get the 2 Ds that my teacher said I would.
That's absolutely amazing, because imagine if you had the right support and understanding in place. Imagine where you could have. I mean, that's the flip of this, isn't it? Is that if certain support had been in place. So then, thinking about your workplace, how have you turned it into a positive in your work environment?
I think obviously doing the marketing side of things, and just looking at things from different people's perspective. So I will always look at a piece of copy for you know, whether that's a blog article or a website, and I will always be able to take the wording and make it simple for everyone to understand. So I think when you have that kind of ability to look at something and not necessarily make it as technical as, you know, the person who's written it, so I will take the core information and simplify it down and just make it easier to understand. So in the terms of, like, you know, when I look at designing a website, I look to try and create it so that everyone can read it and understand it. Because the problem is when you are dyslexic and you come to something like a website and there's complicated words or a complicated structure, or even just too many words, it can be off-putting. So I will always make sure that whoever comes to that is going to, you know, be able to get the information they want quickly, and find it more easy to digest. And I guess I think people that aren't dyslexic maybe don't necessarily see that something is harder for someone else.
That's really interesting. There was a little exercise that I used to do with my adult students when I was teaching, and I would I'd give them a dictation, really traditional dictation. But I would ask them to write with their opposite hand. So if they were right-handed, get them to write with their left hand. And I would talk at the pace. I'd repeat like I would in a normal dictation. But honestly, the frustration they would be feeling, because they were trying to write and they weren't getting it, because they're trying to concentrate on writing and listening and understand and remembering what it was, and then keeping up with the pace of the dictation. And they found it really hard. But I used to do that with every cohort, because these were people who were teacher training, so they were going in to teach. And I just felt it was a really important exercise to do as just an indicator of how challenging it can be when you're giving information to a group and someone in that group has dyslexia, because they can't take it all in the same way as everybody else. And it's just about making people aware and making those very small adjustments to information, because that's the hardest part, is trying to take in big chunks of information.
It's exactly that. I always find myself, if I'm listening to something, I'll be like, Vicky, listen, Vicky, Vicky, you're not listening. Vicky, you're not listening. Vicky, try and listen. And it goes on, and then I can't even stop that noise in my head saying you're not listening, you're not paying attention, when I am, but it's just, then it's too much. Whereas visually, I probably am stronger than other people. So if I see something on a board or a drawing, I can remember that instantly. And so it is that different way of doing it. And I think nowadays people do have more, you know, we all have the interactive whiteboards, the schools have them, people are seeing a lot more visual content. I can remember a lot more visual content than I can the written word or being spoken to.
And by visual, do you mean images, or do you mean words, or both?
A bit of both. Generally like to mix them both up. So when I did years and years ago, I did the CTS training, and I made a massive folder And throughout it, I color coordinated everything, and I drew little pictures on the, on the copy. And I could remember, therefore, what I needed to learn, because I had all these little images. So it would be the image I'd remember, and then I'd be able to recall that particular, piece of technology. But I had to do it my own way, and I had to create this massive folder. Whereas I think other people can just read the textbook, right, and remember it. That doesn't work for me. Everything has to be like, okay, that color for this particular technology and this little image would remind me and trigger it in my brain.
Which is brilliant.
It took a long time.
and yeah, of course, yeah. And I do wonder how many people in that environment where they're training or they're responsible for giving out lots of information, actually take that into consideration, that in their audience they're bound to have, I mean, I don't have the stats on dyslexia, but I do know it's ridiculously high and ridiculously common. And also people of a certain age probably aren't even diagnosed.
I would say, yeah,
got through life.
Generation, I think there's a lot of people that, when I speak to them and I see how they act and how they interact with things, I would say they're dyslexic. I would say, my dad is dyslexic. He's never been diagnosed, but there are certain traits that I can see within people I know who would never have known. And
I mean, some of them are really obvious. So some of them are that difficulty with reading chunks of material and words, but there are other subtle things like, I know a really good friend of mine in terms of timekeeping, and you mentioned about reading a clock and digital, even down to that kind of thing. That can be difficult for somebody with and putting things into any kind of order.
Yeah, because I don't know how old I was when I was learned to tell the time, but the teacher said to my mum, well, she can't tell the time, she can't tell the time. My mum was like, yes, she can. So my mum spent ages sending me into the kitchen to go and read the clock. And I came back and I would tell her the time. And this went on for a week. She went back to school and she went, yes, you can tell the time. And then my mum was like, tell them. And I was like, yeah, it's on the oven. Digital clock is on the oven. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So you find ways to get over it. You almost
you do.
cheat a little bit. You find a way that works for you. And that's what I did. I couldn't tell the time. I can now.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant. But it's those little things that we just take for granted that somebody is able to. I mean, now everybody tells the time from their mobile phone anyway, don't they? They don't. Few people are wearing watches, and they are, but even the watches are smart watches and digital.
And I think that I always had this, because I never really saw the dyslexia as a negative, because I was quite good at drawing and quite good at art, and I always saw that it was almost like a positive. And I was always under the belief that as the more the technology evolved, so computers and phones and things, the more that evolves, it becomes less of a negative, because you're not doing so much writing and reading. It does become easier, and actually the elements of a dyslexic brain are more adapt to skill sets that in the future will be more needed.
Absolutely, totally agree. And when you were talking about visuals, even that, negotiating information on the internet is a lot easier with visuals available. Before. It's not like going to a library to get information.
No, and there is so much
pouring through textbooks and stuff.
Yeah, there's so many things now on YouTube. I can watch something on YouTube and then do it. So I can watch someone on YouTube fix something and I can go and fix it. And that's not a problem. But give me a manual that, says instructions on it, I'll just ignore it.
I don't ever slow up, no, I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
I don't ever slow up, no, I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no, I don't take shit.